When I was 9, my family lived in a small town in upstate New York, in a house that felt much older than it looked from the outside. The kind of place where every floorboard groaned like it was trying to whisper a warning. At night, when the wind pressed against the siding and rattled the window panes, the house seemed alive, breathing with us, listening. My bedroom was tucked away at the end of a narrow hallway that always seemed darker than the rest of the house, no matter how many bulbs my dad replaced. I never liked walking down it alone at night, but it was worse when I woke up thirsty at 2 a.m. and had to make that trip to the kitchen. On one of those nights, when the whole world felt heavy with silence, I climbed out of bed, clutching my stuffed bear, and padded into the hallway. The air was colder than it should have been, and I could swear the shadows didn't line up the way they usually did. Halfway down the hall, I froze. Something was crouched at the far end, just past the faint glow spilling from the kitchen light. At first I thought it was my older brother, playing one of his sick pranks again. But the thing was too still. It was small, hunched, its arms dangling far too long, like they were stretching down toward the floor. My throat locked up. I couldn't even scream. I just stared as the figure's head tilted slowly, almost curiously, like it had just realized I could see it. Then, as if someone snapped their fingers, the air shifted. The smell of damp earth and something rotten seeped into my nose. The thing began to move, not crawling, not walking, just gliding forward, smooth and wrong, its limbs dragging noiselessly against the walls as it came toward me. I bolted back into my room, slammed the door, and hid under my blanket like it could actually protect me. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would give me away. I lay there, shaking, listening. For the longest time there was nothing. Then the sound came. A soft, deliberate scratch at my door, like nails testing the wood. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I couldn't make a sound. I don't know how long it lasted, minutes, maybe hours, before the scratching finally stopped. When morning came and sunlight filled the room, I convinced myself it was a nightmare. But later, when my mom asked why there were marks carved into my bedroom door, I had no answer. That morning, after my mom pointed out the scratches on my bedroom door, I stood there in silence, staring at them while she rubbed her thumb across the grooves. They were real, jagged, uneven lines dug into the wood, too deep for me to have made, too deliberate to be from just bumping the door. She assumed I had done it in my sleep or maybe with a toy, but I didn't argue. I couldn't. Telling her what I had seen would have only made me sound crazy, and the last thing I wanted was for my parents to think I was losing it. But inside, I was terrified, because those marks matched exactly where the sound had come from the night before, the slow, steady scratching that still echoed in my head whenever the house went quiet. All day, I couldn't focus. At school, the teachers talked and the kids laughed and shoved each other in the halls, but I wasn't really there. Every time I blinked, I pictured that crouched thing at the end of the hallway, its head cocked in that unnatural way, like a crow studying its prey. My stomach knotted up, and at lunch I could barely eat. The cafeteria lights flickered, and for a moment, I swore I saw the faint outline of something hunched over in the corner of the room, but when I blinked again it was gone. Maybe I was imagining it, maybe I wasn't. Either way, I didn't tell anyone. That night, I begged my brother to let me sleep in his room, but he laughed in my face and said I was too old to be scared of monsters. I tried to explain that it wasn't a monster, not in the way kids imagine under the bed, it was worse, something that felt like it didn't belong in our world at all. He didn't care. He slammed his door in my face, leaving me alone with my dread. Lying in bed, I tried to stay awake, clutching my bear so tightly it seemed dug into my arms. I left the lamp on, hoping the light would keep whatever I saw away, but around midnight, the bulb flickered once, twice, then died with a sharp pop. My room fell into suffocating darkness. I sat up, holding my breath, my eyes darting toward the door. For a long time, nothing happened, and I almost convinced myself the light going out was just bad luck. Then I heard it again. The faint drag of something moving outside my door, slow and heavy, like wet cloth against wood. My chest tightened as the sound circled the hallway. It didn't feel random. It felt like it was looking for me. Step. Drag. Step. Drag. The floorboards groaned under its weight, but in a way that seemed too careful, too intentional, like it wanted me to know it was there but wasn't ready to show itself. I wanted to scream, but once again, I couldn't. My body locked up, every muscle tense. The steps grew closer, stopping right in front of my door. Silence followed, an awful, suffocating silence. Then, just like before, the scratching began. But this time it wasn't the same as the night before. Instead of slow, curious scrapes, it was frantic, angry, like claws trying to dig their way through. I grabbed my blanket and pulled it over my head, tears streaming down my face, listening as the scratching turned to pounding, rattling the door in its frame. It felt like it was going to burst open any second. Then suddenly, it stopped. I lay there for what felt like forever, waiting for it to start again, but the hallway was completely silent. I thought maybe I had finally imagined it all. My eyelids grew heavy, and somehow, despite my fear, I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight poured into the room. The door stood closed, but when I got up and looked closer, the wood was torn up worse than before. Deep gouges trailed all the way down to the floor, like something had tried to claw its way inside. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. My bedroom door locked from the inside, a little twist latch that I hadn't touched the night before. But when I checked it that morning, it was unlocked. The third night, I tried everything to keep myself safe. I dragged my desk chair in front of the door, stacked my schoolbooks on top of it like a barricade, and even wedged my dresser as close as I could against the frame. I didn't care how ridiculous it looked, anything was better than lying in bed knowing that whatever it was could come scratching at the door again. My parents thought I was going through some kind of night terror phase, and my brother teased me about being a baby, but I didn't care what they said anymore. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. That night, I stayed awake as long as I could, flashlight clutched in one hand, bear in the other. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Around 1 a.m, I started to drift off, my eyelids heavy. That's when I heard it again, only this time it wasn't scratching. It was whispering. A low, guttural murmur slipped through the walls, so soft at first I thought I was imagining it. But it grew louder, layered, like dozens of voices speaking all at once but never forming real words. The sound crawled through the cracks of the door and coiled in the corners of my room. My stomach flipped, bile burning my throat, and I pressed my hands over my ears. Still, the whispers slid under my skin, vibrating in my skull. It felt like the thing outside wasn't just trying to get into my room anymore, it was trying to get into me. I couldn't take it. I leapt from my bed and yanked the door open, half expecting to see it standing right there in the hallway. But the hall was empty. The whispers cut off instantly, leaving only the thump of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I should have felt relief, but instead my fear deepened. Because that hallway, always dark, always strange, looked wrong. Longer than it should have been. The shadows didn't match the light from the kitchen night bulb. I backed up, but my foot hit something on the floor, something soft and damp. When I shined my flashlight down, my breath caught in my throat. A trail of small, muddy footprints stretched across the hallway carpet, leading straight to my room. They weren't mine, and they weren't my brother's. They were too small, bare, smeared with dark patches that weren't just mud. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I followed them with my eyes. The trail stopped right at my door, then continued inside my room. Panic surged through me. I spun around, sweeping the light across my room. The beam landed on the corner, and for a fraction of a second I saw it. The same hunched figure, its limbs bent wrong, its face hidden by a mess of black hair, crouched like a spider at the edge of my dresser. My scream ripped through the air as I stumbled back into the hall, slamming the door shut. The impact knocked my barricade of books and furniture aside, and the door burst open again behind me. I didn't look back. I tore down the hallway, feet pounding the creaking boards, heart clawing at my chest. I made it to my parents' room and threw myself onto their bed, sobbing and gasping for breath. My mom woke instantly, grabbing my shoulders, but when I tried to explain, the words tangled in the throat. She rubbed my back, shushing me, while my dad went to check my room. When he came back, he said there was nothing there, no footprints, no scratches, nothing. He looked at me like I was just another kid with an overactive imagination. But I knew. I knew I hadn't dreamed it, because when he came back into the room, he forgot to close my bedroom door. From where I sat in my parents' bed, through the crack in the hallway, I could see my room. And in the shadows, just for an instant, I saw something move. After that night, I refused to sleep alone. My parents grew frustrated, telling me I was too old to be crawling into their bed every night, but I didn't care. The memory of those muddy, blood-streaked footprints leading straight into my room haunted me every time I closed my eyes. Still, life had to move on. They forced me back into my own bed after a few nights, insisting I was safe, that it had only been a nightmare. And for a short while, I almost believed them. But then it started following me outside the house. It began at school. I was sitting in class, the kind of drowsy haze settling in after lunch, when I noticed something strange. Across the room, in the reflection of the window, I saw the students sitting at their desks, their heads bent over their papers. But in the reflection, there was one extra figure. Hunched, long-armed, sitting in the very back corner where no one else was. My pulse spiked. I turned around quickly, but the seat was empty. When I looked back at the glass, the reflection was normal again. I told myself I was just tired, that it was a trick of the light, but the unease sat heavy in my chest. Later that day, when the final bell rang, I walked home along the cracked sidewalk like I always did. It was a gray afternoon, the kind where the clouds hang low, pressing down on everything. As I passed the row of old maple trees near the park, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure slipping between the trunks, hunched and dragging, keeping pace with me but never stepping fully into view. I walked faster, clutching my backpack straps, the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes quickening. Every time I glanced over, I saw flashes of it. Long pale fingers curling around bark, a glimpse of that unnatural tilt of the head. It wasn't hiding from me anymore. It wanted me to know it was there. By the time I reached home, I was shaking. I slammed the door shut behind me and pressed my back against it, gasping for breath. My mom asked what was wrong, but I couldn't tell her. I was too afraid she'd dismiss me again, or worse, believe me and start seeing it too. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening for sounds outside my window. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel in the driveway. My body froze as I turned my head toward the glass. The curtain swayed gently as if stirred by breath, though the window was shut. Gathering every shred of courage, I peeked through a tiny gap in the fabric. It was standing there. Right in the middle of the driveway, beneath the pale wash of the streetlight. Its body was thin, stretched too tall, its arms hanging almost to its knees. The face, or what should have been a face, was covered entirely by matted, dripping black hair. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt them, burning into me. The thing tilted its head again, the same curious, mocking gesture I had first seen in the hallway. Then it raised one arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed directly at my window. I stumbled backward, knocking over my lamp, which shattered against the floor. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. When my parents burst into the room, demanding to know what happened, I pointed outside. But when they looked, the driveway was empty. The next morning, I noticed something chilling. Outside, in the dirt just beneath my window, were footprints. Small, muddy, the same size as the ones I had seen inside my house. They led right up to the wall, then simply stopped, as if the thing had climbed straight up toward me. That was the moment I knew, this thing wasn't tied to the house. It wasn't a nightmare stuck to my room. It was following me, wherever I went. And no one else could see it. I told myself it couldn't get worse. I was wrong. After the footprints by my window, the thing stopped pretending. It started leaving evidence on me. The first time it actually touched me I was waiting for the bus, shoulders hunched against a cold wind. Kids jostled and joked around me, earbuds in, worlds glued to their phones. I felt it before I saw it, like a fingertip of ice tracing the line of my neck. I turned as if to catch the breeze, and for a second my skin crawled with the sensation of breath that wasn't mine. A pressure, gentle and probing, like someone testing whether I would notice. I laughed it off aloud, my voice sounded tinny and small. When I looked down, there were 4 pale, crescent-shaped bruises running along my collarbone, tiny as a child's fingernail, already darkening. I touched them. They stung like a fresh pinch. No one else seemed to see them or comment. They were mine and suddenly impossible to explain. That night, the whispers returned, thicker and closer, seeping through the walls like condensation. They were no longer content with scratching at the borders of my life, they wanted entrance. I dreamed of crawling under my skin. In the dream, millions of tiny mouths pressed against the inside of my throat, wanting to be let out. I woke with my throat raw and bleeding, the skin inside split, sticky on my pillow. My parents thought it was a nightmare. My mom fussed over my forehead and wiped my lips with a damp cloth as if feverish. I lied and said I must have bitten myself. Her eyes stayed on me longer than usual, troubled but unreadable. After that, physical contact escalated. It learned my patterns and used them. The bus, the narrow stretch of sidewalk by the bakery, the quiet rows between lockers at school, places where I could be alone for a heartbeat. In each of those places I would feel it, a drag across my ankle, a hand ghosting my hair, a pressure at the base of my skull that made my knees wobble. Sometimes I would turn to meet it, fury and fear burning my tongue, and see nothing but an impossible stillness, a space in the air that swallowed light. Other times the world showed me what it had done, the back of my hand would bear a smear of something dark, sticky, like mud mixed with dried blood, my cheek would bruise in the shape of a palm, my arms would bloom with little purple crescents that faded into ugly pale moons. The physical marks were the worst, not for the pain, but for the proof. I started keeping my sleeve pulled down even in summer, making excuses for mysterious scrapes and cuts. You can only explain so many bruises before people start to ask questions you don't want to answer. My dad cornered me once after dinner, his face a map of confusion and anger. "What are you getting into?" he asked. I flinched, then lied. "I fell," I said. I didn't mean to. He didn't press it, but the worry in his eyes felt like a blade. It wanted more than to mark me. It wanted me to notice it. It wanted my fear. One night, when I had barricaded myself in the bathroom with the fan rattling and the light on, I felt a weight press against the other side of the thin wall. The thing didn't touch me directly, it made the walls shudder as if something heavy leaned on them. I could hear its breathing, wet, patient, and then, unmistakably, the sound of nails dragging along tile. The bathroom mirror fogged from steam, and when I wiped it with my sleeve, a handprint appeared on the inside of the glass, thumb splayed, fingers splayed too long to belong to a human. The cold seared through the ceramic like frostbite in reverse. That was when it reached for my face. I remember the sensation as if someone had pressed a coin against my eyelid, round, dull, and impossibly cold. I screamed and flailed, catching at empty air. The scream brought my parents running. My mom flicked on the light and found me slumped against the sink, eyes wide and streaming, hair matted. On my cheek were 4 pale grooves, vertical and parallel, like the teeth of a zipper. I tried to tell them what had happened, but words stuck like cobwebs. My dad said we were going to the doctor. At the clinic a nurse frowned at the marks, took down my story with a professional patience, and when she left the exam room the doctor murmured something to my parents I couldn't hear. The look on their faces afterward was worse than any question. It was fear that I had never seen them wear, fear for me, and in their silence, for themselves. After the clinic visit, the thing stopped being careful. It started appearing in my dreams fully formed, tall, wet-limbed, hair like a curtain over its face, its head cocked as if listening to something only it could hear. It would lean down and press its forehead to mine, cold and heavy, and whisper. The whispers weren't words I could understand, they were a pressure in my skull, a knowledge folding into place. When I woke, my voice would be hoarse, and sometimes I would find myself whistling a tune I'd never known, tiny, wrong notes that stuck around like seeds. The final straw came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the yard, mowing the strip of grass by the curb. My dad had insisted I learn to help out, when I felt the hair on my arms lift. I turned and there it was, standing at the edge of the lawn under the old maple, its outline drawn in the shadow like a badly erased smudge. For the first time since all of this began, someone else saw it. My neighbor, an elderly woman who tended her roses, froze and let out a small, surprised sound. She clutched at her chest like a bell had tolled in her ribs. "Bless you," she whispered, more to herself than to me. Her eyes were wet. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Seeing someone else flinch at the air where it had been didn't bring reassurance. It brought terror. If I was finally making other people notice, what would come next? I stopped going outside alone.